I wanted to talk to you today about the Hebrew language and the Bible, its role in the Bible. I used to think when a pastor would explain the meaning of a word in Hebrew, does it really matter? Why should I care? Because sometimes the translation offered did not mean much to me. It sounded like a simple, straightforward translation. It wasn't until I started attending a church whose pastor is actually Jewish that through his preaching and knowledge of the Hebrew language, I was encouraged to investigate. It was then that I realized the language is much, much deeper than I thought. Please know that I'm not an expert by any means. I am just beginning to discover how wonderful this language is. What you will see today, it only scratches the surface of the information that is available. I just hope to steer your mind and encourage you to do your own research and learn more about this wonderful language. After you see the examples I have, you'll be surprised. And I hope you'll understand how biblical translation became somehow diluted. The best way I can explain it is like this, and if you're bilingual, you'll understand. A joke, for example, is very difficult to translate. In one language, it's very funny, but when you translate it, it doesn't make any sense. It kind of loses its punch. As far as the Word of God, it's even more deep than we gather from the English or the Spanish or any translation. There is much more than meets the eyes. And it makes sense that is the case because Proverbs 25:2 tells us that it is the glory of God to conceal a matter, but the glory of kings is to search out a matter. So biblical Hebrew is actually what was used for the scriptures. It is called Paleo Hebrew. And you may ask, how is that different from modern Hebrew? Old English is more difficult than the current English. Just like that, modern Hebrew is simpler than biblical Hebrew. As far as structure and language, it is essentially identical to the biblical Hebrew. It just looks different. It is read from right to left. The first letter is Aleph, the last letter is Tav. Now, each Hebrew letter has a spiritual energy. It is considered to be the DNA of creation. It's a word, it's a picture, it has a value. Okay, so let's talk about the spiritual energy of the Hebrew letter. God spoke, meaning that the energy combined with the sound produced reality. In other words, God spoke the world into existence. If you're not a Christian, you may say that is crazy. And yeah, okay, I know it sounds crazy, but it's interesting to note that scientists have proven that everything in existence is not what it seems, but is the result of frequency, sound, light, and vibration. I'm not going to go into detail that matter does not exist in the way we perceive it. But if you're curious, just familiarize yourself with the concept of quantum theory and how the particles behave. Now, in the video Bringing Matter to Life with Sound, the author says, as you watch this film, you will see living forms, almost animal-like creatures, continents being formed, the earth itself coming into existence. Everything owes its existence solely and completely to sound. Sound is the factor that holds it together. Sound is the basis for form and shape. This was written by Hans Jenny, and he's actually he was a Swiss physician and natural scientist who coined the term cymatics to describe the acoustic effects of sound wave phenomena. If you're not familiar with this, his video, I encourage you to watch it. It's very interesting. What you see here, let me see if I can get this started. Okay, good. Is what the different sounds make. Of course, nothing is real. Nothing comes to life. It's just a form, reality, without the wisdom of God. Now, scientists do not admit But the Bible tells us this. Go to Jeremiah 10:12. It says, "It is he who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding stretched out the heavens." The key words here are power, wisdom, and understanding. Genesis, and God said, God spoke. The waves of the sound are the glue that keep things together. This is why I want to explain the importance of the Hebrew language. This is spiritual energy. Okay. Now, as far as the DNA of creation, many Torah scholars believe that the Hebrew language is the DNA of creation. And the DNA is actually the codes that determine what something is, which means that these scholars believe that God first created the letters, and through the Hebrew alphabet, then he created the world. It's like every letter is like an atom, and when combined with other letters, you have a description of reality. Their reasoning for this point is that in Genesis 1, when we read "in the beginning God," and just as a side note, God in Hebrew here is Elohim, which is plural, we see after the word God two letters, the Aleph and the Tav. And these letters are not translated. This is why scholars believe that God created the alphabet first. Okay? And if that was the case, it would read, "In the beginning, God created the Aleph Tav, the heavens and the earth." Now, there's another theory about the Aleph Tav, and the theory is the following, that because it's not translated, it represents God's mark, God's signature. It's like when you have to initial a document to make it legal. The same way he signed it to make it legal, so that there will be no doubt that God is the one that created the heavens and the earth. Now let's go back to the alphabet, and let's look at the first and the last letter. Now, the first one is the Aleph, the last one is the Tav, and you're familiar with these two letters. Each letter has a few meanings, and it's almost like they tell a story in itself. Okay, the Aleph is silent. Aleph speaks of the Father, deity, monotheism, oneness. It is connected with something above this world, something spiritual. It is considered to be sacred. It symbolizes completion and perfection. The very first word in Exodus 22, where it talks about the commandments, is actually Aleph. Now, the letter Tav means mark, sign, signal, monument. That's as a word. Each letter has different meanings as words. Now, as a picture, the Aleph represents an ox, and the Tav represents a cross. When you put them together, we saw that before, that it was not translated. So here we have at least three mysteries. It could represent God's signature. It could be that the Hebrew alphabet itself is witness to what God declares in Isaiah and Revelation. I am the first and the last. It could also mean, based on the pictures, that redemption of man started with a sacrificial animal and it ended with a cross. And we see in Hebrews, 1 John, and 1 Timothy that Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. And I found this in the internet. I thought it was really neat. In Isaiah 44:6, he says, "I am the first, I am the last, and beside me there is no God." So the Aleph represents God, an ox, strength, a leader. And then at the end, he finishes everything with God's cross and the covenant, the mark, the sign. That's it. There's no other God. He's the first and he's the last. Now, let's take two letters, the Aleph, which we know now represents ox, bull, strength, leader first. And let's take the letter Lamed, which is a staff, cattle, goat, a prod, it means towards, it means control, authority. The two letters together, combined, become the word El. And the word El is actually God. God is the strong or first authority. All right, so let's take another one. Aleph and Beit. When you get those two together, you get that the Aleph is the ox and the Beit represents a house. So those two together, the Aleph is the strength, teacher, and now the Beit is the house. So we have strength, teacher, house. The two are the word Ab, and Ab means the strength teacher of the house or the God of the house, and that's the word for father. Romans 8:15 tells us, "For you have not received the spirit of slavery leading to fear again, but you have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by which we cry, Abba, Father." Abba meaning daddy. Now, we know now that the Aleph and the Beit become the word father. And if we insert another letter, and here we have the Aleph and the Beit, and we insert Hey. Hey means to reveal. And so what are we revealing here? We're revealing the Father. To behold, to reveal the Father. And the word is Ahab, or Ahab. I'm not sure about the pronunciation. So to reveal the Father means love. Society teaches you to love yourself, but the love that God teaches is very different. Rabbi Mordecai Kraft said it very nicely. Love, he says, is given to somebody else to the point of making that person part of you. If you can be part of me, that means I love you. The only way you can be part of me is if I invest in you through giving. If you don't give, there's no love. So the next time you say, I love you, well, reflect on this before you say it, okay? Let's take another word, Zion. The word Zion, it was used in 2 Samuel as the city of David, in Isaiah as Jerusalem, in Zechariah as Israel, and is composed of two letters, Tzadik, Yod, Vav, and Nun. Now, Tzadik means fish, hook, harvest, need, while Yud means hand as a close hand, a deed to make. Have Vav, which means nail to secure, and this is among other meanings, okay? And then we have Nun, which means fish, moving, activity, life. So we have the hook, we have the close hand, we have the nail, and we have the fish that is alive. So when you take those symbols, it's very interesting because in that word Zion, God is revealing his plan, as we see in John 12:32. And when I am lifted up from the earth, I will draw people to myself. All right, so now let's take the word Esh. Esh is fire, and we know that God is a consuming fire. So here, Esh also means strong devourer. Now, when we look at the letters, it's composed of the Aleph and the Shin, and we know the meaning of Aleph, and now the meaning of Shin is teeth, consume, destroy. If we take that word fire, and now we add another letter, the letter Yud, now we have the word Ish, man, husband. And please excuse my pronunciation again. Now, we know the meaning of Aleph and teeth and Shin, and the Yod is a hand, close hand, a deed to make work. So the meaning of man, husband is that man works in or has his hand in the midst of fire. Now let's take the same word fire, but this time let's add a hey at the end. And we know that hey means to reveal. When it is at the end of the word, it can mean what comes from or out of. Okay? And that word now is the word Esha, which means woman as in wife. And the meaning is that woman is that which the fire reveals, or the one that comes out of the fire. Now, if we look at the two words, man as a husband and then woman as a wife, the two words come from the word fire. The difference is that for man, the yod was added, and for woman, the hey was added. It's interesting because those two letters are part of God's name, as we see in Psalm 68:4. Sing unto God, sing praises to his name, exalt him that rides upon the heavens, by his name Yah, and rejoice before him. So it's like God took part of him, the Yod, and gave it to the man, and then took the other part, the Hey, and gave it to the woman. And here we have a mystery. Actually, the words for husband and wife reveal that matrimony can only be between man and woman, because a man can only bring the Yod, and a woman can only bring the Hey, and together they bring God. His connection with God, it's a connection that only a man can have, and her connection only a woman can have. That's why when you have two men, the two are bringing the Yod, but the Yods do not bring God into the picture. And in the same way, when we have a man and a woman and they don't want God in the picture, then the place where God should reside, that part where his name goes, the Yod in the man and the Hey in the woman, that place is empty. And so we only have a consuming fire. Now, since man and woman were created in God's image, they also are consuming fire. No wonder it's so difficult to be married without God in the picture. And I'm not saying that all marriages outside, having God in the picture fail. I'm not saying that. But what happens when you have two consuming fires that touch each other? There is an explosion. In general, we have two selfish people that care about doing what they want, and that's why there's so much divorce. So let's move on. Have you ever been bored about reading the genealogy in the Bible? I was, until I saw this presented by Chuck Missler in one of his conferences. We have a genealogy in Genesis 5, and we see that the genealogy goes all the way from Adam to Noah. And on the right, we have the meaning. Adam means man, Seth means appointed, Enosh means mortal, Kenan sorrow, Mahalalel, the blessed God, Jared shall come down, Enoch teaching, Methuselah his day shall bring, Lamech despairing, rest or comfort means Noah. When we put it in sentence form, then we have man is appointed mortal sorrow, but the blessed God shall come down teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest or comfort. So what we see here in the names, we know that the names in the Bible are for a reason, but in the names provided in Genesis 5, God revealed his sovereign plan. And again, if you're not Christian, this is not going to make a lot of sense, but those of us that are, this is a huge revelation, because with those names, God is presenting his plan that his son was going to come and die for us. When we look at Psalm 119, it's very interesting because it is considered to be the psalm that praises the Hebrew alphabet. Why? Well, Psalm 119 has 176 verses divided in groups of 8, and there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. When you multiply those two, you get 176. And each sequence of 8 begins with a word of the appropriate letter. So the first 8 is the Aleph, begins with Aleph. The second 8 verses begin with Beit, and so on. Now, when we look at Zephaniah 3:8, it's the only verse in the Bible that uses every letter of the alphabet. And it's interesting because here he's showing his anger. He says, "Therefore wait for me, declares the Lord, for the day when I rise up as a witness. Indeed, my decision is to gather nations, to assemble kingdoms, to pour out on them my indignation, all my burning anger. For all the earth will be devoured by the fire of my zeal." So he uses the whole alphabet to express his indignation. And then in the next verse, he says, "For then I will turn to the peoples a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord to serve him with one consent." Could it be that we're going to get a Hebrew download? It is believed that Hebrew is God's language, and we see why, because through it he reveals parts of his personality, his plan, etc. And it's interesting because less than 100 years ago, Hebrew was considered to be a dead language, and now it's being studied by millions. Let's move on. As a numerical value, each letter has a value. So the letter Aleph is 1, Beit is 2, Gamel is 3, Dalet is 4, and so on. And it goes all the way to 10. And then it starts with 10, 20, 30, 40, all the way to 100, and then 100, 200, 300, 400. Okay, so if we take one of those, the letter Vav has a numerical value of 6. And we're all familiar with the Monster drink. I saw this presentation in the internet, so I borrowed from her. You can actually find that it's very interesting. But this is the bottom line, that even though what we see, the design looks like the scratches of a claw of an animal, it also looks like 3-letter Vavs, and the value is 666. Now, even the O in Monster, if you look carefully, is a cross. It's not an O, it's a cross with a cloth. Now, if this drink's design was made on purpose or not, it doesn't matter. While God respects the free will of people, when he calls you and you say, "No, I'm not ready," he respects that. The enemy does not. The enemy uses people's ignorance to reveal his purposes. And the Bible tells us in Revelation, "Here's wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. And then we see that it also says on the drink, "Unleash the beast." Could that be a coincidence? Let's move on. The word Adam tells us something very important about who we are. Just like the chemistry of an element gives that element its exact properties. Okay, the same is with Adam. The word Adam is composed of the word Aleph, and which means divine spark. It means that he took that breath and put it in us. The word Dalet, which is blood, and the word Mem, which means water. So, as I mentioned before, the letter Aleph is silent because it's too sacred to pronounce. Aleph is the divine spark, is the image of God inside of us. Now, the second letter, Dalet, means blood, and this is the physical side of who we are. Do you know how many miles of blood vessels do we have in our bodies? Well, let's look at the value first. The divine spark is 1, the blood is 40, and then the water is 4 to make up to 44, the physical part. So just keep that in mind, and let me answer the question, how many miles? It's about 100,000 miles, or 40 billion blood vessels. That's how important the blood is. It's enough to go around the world 4 times. Now, where do we get the blood from? We get it from our parents. So let's look at the numerical value. Father Ab has a numerical value of 3, and Mother Haim a numerical value of 41. So together, we see that, I'm trying to move, okay, we get 44 in Adam, and then the father and the mother also have 44, which means that a person cannot be purely spiritual and isolate himself to be with God alone forever. That person is forgetting his second intricate part, the physical part. We're both physical and spiritual, and we can't deny each. The challenge is to bring it into a balance, and I think we do that when we go on Sundays to worship God, or we're studying the Bible in the Bible study, and then we have fellowship and we eat. I think that's a perfect combination of what it means to have a balanced life. Now, does an animal have that challenge of having to have a spiritual and a physical side? Because what we've seen here is that when we come into the world, we cannot stay the way we are. We're supposed to grow, become something better, and have fellowship and so on. So let's see. Meet Mikey and Shiva. Shiva was our geocaching buddy. She passed away a few years ago, and Mike is our current pet, and we love him to death. But anyway, when we look at animals, they glorify God because they do what they're supposed to do. Now, it took me a while to find the word for domesticated animal, and if I made a mistake, I'm sorry. But the word is bahema, and it means in it, it is what it is. And if you compare the two, Adam and bahema, bahema doesn't have the aleph. It doesn't have God's image in it. That's why we need to change. We need to come into this world and not remain the same. Like Live Action said it in a poster, I am not a potential human. I am a human with potential. The human being is created with potential, but it's our responsibility to become something better. And in a sense, it's our responsibility to accept God's invitation to have a relationship with Him. This is why we progress from a baby to learning to speak, to going to school, learning a trade. We take that raw material and become something completely different. God made man from the earth to become something, okay, to have a relationship with Him. And talking about earth, the word for earth is the same word for Adam, but with a hey at the end. Remember, the hey means to reveal, okay? Now, the soil in itself, when you look at soil, it has no value. It depends what you do with it, what determines the value. Now, the word Adama, there's another word, Adame, which is very similar. It's derived from the word soil, which means I will resemble Hashem. Hashem is the name. I will resemble Aleph. I will resemble God's image. Okay? So we have that choice, our physical part, to resemble God by accepting Him in our lives, by getting to know Him through His word and prayer. If we don't do that, then we stray away. The picture you see here is of a man that was on drugs for a year and then came out of it and was clean for at least a year. When we don't have God in our lives, it's like God sees the picture on the left. Okay, but He loves us so much that He sent His only Son to die for us so that we could have a life and have it abundantly. His blood cleanses us. When He looks at us, He no longer sees the man in the left. He sees the blood of Christ, which cleanses us. And it's like he's seeing the man on the right, if that makes any sense. So I encourage you to choose God. John 1:12 says, "But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." So choose life, choose God. And here are my resources. I hope you liked the presentation. I hope it encourages you to actually do more research. And if you liked this presentation, then click like. And if you like the type of content that I'm bringing, then subscribe. All right, so God bless you and see you next time.